So looking at dashed lines in Illustrator, we're gonna just draw a line really quick and we'll just make sure that that actually has a stroke on it. So we'll go ahead and pull up our swatches and we'll just make sure that that has a stroke on it. So it's a 1 point stroke right now. And we're just gonna zoom in on this line and see what happens when we go over certain options for a dashed line. So if we go into our window and we look at stroke, we're going to have a window that looks like this pop up. And we're going to go over a couple of these options in a second, but we'll go over our dashed line first. So if we click dashed line, we're going to first click our line and then go to dashed line. And you'll see here that we have an option for dash, gap, dash, gap, dash, gap. So what we can do here is look at what if we do a 1 point and 1 point dash line. So basically what we're looking at here is the length of our first dash and the length of our gap. So we have a proportion here of what our stroke is. So if we change our stroke here to 1 point, if we change the stroke to 1 point, then we also have a 1 point dash and a 1 point gap. You'll see that that's basically a square. So our dash is 1 point long and then our stroke is 1 point wide. So we're looking here at a ratio. So if we change the stroke of our line here, it's not going to change what the relationship is of our dash line here. So then we can look at what happens if we change our dash and our gap, and then we can actually change, so we can do something like this. So you can actually make different dash lines based on what your first dash is, your first gap is, your second dash, and your second gap. And then you can go on and you can actually add to this to make that a totally custom line. If you don't want these anymore, you can just delete them and they'll just totally go away. Whoops, we need to be highlighted first. So we'll just delete these and then they'll go away. And then you can see, you can go ahead and change your line based on what you want your dashes to be here. So a couple of more options that we can look at here is going to be if we have different types of caps on our line. So if we go over really quick what the actual caps are doing, so if we turn our dash line off for this, we're just going to look at what our caps are doing. So we can see that our length of our line is from basically that point to that point. And then if we have a projecting cap, it's going to project basically half of our stroke beyond the end of that line. If we have a butt cap, it's going to end directly at the end of that line. And if we have a round cap, it's going to make an evenly rounded circle around that. So these will also begin to affect our dash line. So if we have a projecting cap, that projecting cap is actually going to go into the gap that we've set up here. So a projecting cap will actually increase the length of your dash and decrease the length of your cap. So just be weary of that. And then obviously that will be then affected by your stroke, because your stroke is basically determining how much that cap extends beyond. Then if we want to look at what happens if we make a circle, a rounded cap, we can then start to look at what something like a line like this would look like. So we have a butt cap there. So if we lower our dash length, so let's say we go down to something like 0.1, what we're going to see is that that's going to get closer and closer and closer to an actual circle. So we can here look at how to make like something like a dotted line. So if we make that something like 0.01, the length of it at that point becomes so low that it's really just accounting for a rounded cap on one side and a rounded cap on another, and then not much of an actual line in the middle. And then if we go ahead and increase the gap that we have between those lines, we'll see that we end up with something that looks like an actual dotted line. Now these are not perfect circles, but they'll get pretty close for the sake of making something that looks like a dotted line. Then if we go down, we'll see that those still look like circles, but they're looking less and less like circles. So we can just go ahead and make those really, really small, and then that will end up looking something like this. So those are a couple of different options in the stroke menu. By default, when you're just starting out, what I would recommend doing is just take a look at 1 point and 1 point, and then look at butting caps, just because they're a little bit more clear what you're doing. And then you can mess around with line weights and strokes and things like that to get this line to look right.